OsteoSignal Episode 31.
The Metabolic Triad, how ferritin, thyroid hormone, and mitochondrial respiration form a coupled feedback loop. She's in her mid-40s, nothing catastrophic has happened, but over the last 2 or 3 years, something has quietly shifted. She's tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. She's cold when everyone around her is comfortable. Her thinking is slower. She notices it, even if nobody else does. She's been told her thyroid is normal, her blood work is fine, she should focus on stress and sleep. And she's starting to wonder if this is just what getting older feels like. She is not just getting older. She has a metabolic feedback loop that is quietly failing, and the failure is happening below the threshold of standard laboratory detection.
This is OsteoSignal with Neal O'Neal, a podcast exploring how osteopathic science can help you decode the body's biomechanical, biochemical, and bioelectrical signals so you can thrive. And now, here's Neal.
Welcome to OsteoSignal, where we go underneath the surface of clinical practice and into the biology that actually explains how the body heals, adapts, and breaks down. I'm Neal O'Neal, and with me are Autumn Mayberry and Brenton Mayberry. Today, we're talking about what I call the Metabolic Triad, 3 biological systems so tightly coupled that you genuinely cannot understand what's going on in one without understanding the other 2. Iron metabolism, thyroid hormone signaling, and mitochondrial respiration. They form a feedback loop, and when it breaks at all 3 nodes simultaneously. So let me give you the short version of each node before I show you how they talk to each other. Iron, specifically ferritin, we've been speaking about that lately. Your iron storage reserve. Iron is an embedded structural cofactor in thyroid peroxidase, the enzyme that produces thyroid hormone. It's an electron carrier in the mitochondrial respiratory chain at complexes 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it's a required cofactor in the enzymes that cross-link collagen. Iron isn't variable in this system. It's the enabling cofactor at every node simultaneously. Thyroid hormone. The thyroid produces T4, which is the storage form. T4 has to be converted to active T3 by deiodinase enzymes in peripheral tissues, liver, kidney, muscle. Obviously, 3 of the places that as a manual therapist, we would go and look to make sure that those areas aren't inflamed and are able to function appropriately. More from a biomechanical standpoint as structures in your body as opposed to the chemical factories. Because, of course, the chemical factory, that's what we're talking about, is that you need the right substrates and the chemical factory will do its job. T3 is the active form of thyroid hormone, and T3 is what binds to receptors in the cell nucleus and drives the gene expression changes that determine how fast the mitochondria run. So T3 is the amplifier. It doesn't produce energy. It sets how loudly the mitochondria are allowed to play. And the mitochondria, the engine, 90% of cellular ATP comes from oxidative phosphorylation inside the mitochondria. T3 directly regulates the transcription of the proteins that make up the electron transport chain. It drives mitochondrial biogenesis. Yes, you heard that right. It actually causes the mitochondria to be produced in the cell. The creation of new mitochondria, which means a drop in T3, doesn't just slow the engine, it reduces the number of engines being built, right? So if you're not getting T3 into the cell, you're not making new mitochondria to produce ATP for energy. The cell physically shrinks its energy production capacity, and that capacity doesn't come back quickly. So, and the reason that this matters clinically is that the single node treatment produces single node improvement. You can optimize ferritin, and the patient gets better. But if the thyroid conversion is still impaired and the mitochondria are still running below capacity, the patient is better, but not right. You need to treat the loop. And again, as I was saying, we as manual therapists look at those structures that help support the liver, the kidneys, and the thyroid. Now, one of the biggest areas we can talk about is the thoracic inlet and the diaphragm. And if those aren't treated properly, and if someone doesn't know how to evaluate those areas and treat them thoroughly, then you're just not going to move ahead in this arena. Okay, so let's talk about how the loops couple and cascades.
Yeah, could I just jump in and just kind of summarize the loop? So the body's production of ferritin directly translates into how much T4 can be changed into T3 that your cells can use to signal the mitochondria to use energy or to produce energy for the body. Is that correct?
Well, so the body doesn't produce the iron. The body uses the iron, but is the iron there to be used? And when it's there to be used, can it be used in the thyroid? And you got this part that right on that the thyroid has to be able to produce T4, heavily ferritin dependent. The T4
Okay.
has to be transmitted to, or converted to T3, liver, kidney, muscle.
Now, does the body use iron to do that?
And at every stage, the body needs the iron to do this. So that's the whole problem, is that every stage is iron dependent. And so if your labs look fine in your bloodstream, but they don't look fine in your muscles or your liver or your kidneys, then this process, or in your thyroid, then this process doesn't occur. Or it occurs at a much reduced rate.
There's some kind of barrier between what's in your bloodstream that shows up on the results and what your body's actually using and how it shows up in the way you're able to function.
Exactly. And then the problem being that it's the medical science, how we measure, since we're looking for a disease, right? Anemia, we are only looking at extreme disease markers, but that doesn't tell you about health. If we were looking for health, we would be looking at ferritin, transferritin binding capacity, total iron binding capacity, transferrin saturation rate. We'd be looking at these other numbers because we would be looking at health, as opposed to kind of where medicine is just seeking out a disease to treat. And that's really the underpinning problem, is that we're looking for disease, not looking for health. And so, I mean, that's really why the three of us are here, is we're trying to bring health and understanding of health to patients and to therapists, right? So, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, thank you for pointing that out. It's kind of an interesting thing that at every stage you need ferritin, and it won't be measured in hemoglobin, hematocrit, or red blood cell count, which is the standard measure. They have to do extra measures, and unfortunately, it's as simple as the doctor checking those boxes off when a blood sample is taken for analysis anyway. So it's a little surprising that that's not included all the time.
It's not a standard measure. It's
not a standard measure.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it's overlooked.
Yes,
and so you also mentioned that this is a loop, and so I think you might be talking later in this podcast about how that mitochondria respiration comes back to ferritin. Is it production or utilization? How would you characterize that?
I would say that the mitochondria are going to utilize the ferritin, but then also that energy then allows all the other cells of your body, particularly those muscles, liver, kidney, to also have the energy to do that job. So the real loop is that if you don't get this energy, your ability to absorb iron in the intestinal tract is decreased. So
I see.
If you don't get enough iron in, then you don't have enough energy. And if you don't have enough energy, you can't get iron in. And the death spiral begins.
Uh-huh.
So we'll give away the ending right here, that, it's one of those things that you just start going down and down. And this is the whole problem, is the patient is slowly winding their way down this death spiral and feeling worse and worse and worse, and having, more brain fog, less energy, and things are just going poorer and poorer. Hormones aren't being made, et cetera, et cetera. So it just, the problem starts spreading out. But it's like the frog in the pot of water. Somebody's turned the heat on at a very low rate, and so nobody around the frog can tell the frog that the water is getting hot. And so the frog's trying to jump, saying, maybe I should jump out of here, I think it's getting hot, and everyone's measuring it, going, no, it's fine to us. So that really is where the problem occurs. Like, there's no way for patients and therapists, right? Because again, back to this whole, patients' bodies, they won't heal properly. They won't respond to treatment appropriately if they don't have the right amount of iron, because they won't have the right amount of thyroid. They won't have the right amount of storage thyroid. They won't have the right amount of active thyroid. They won't be able to make new mitochondria to increase their energy when there's an energy demand. I mean, there's the surprising thing, is that you actually create mitochondria on demand. Like, the more active you are, the more mitochondria you make in your cells. The more mitochondria you make in your cells, the more energy you have, the more you can work out. So you can see how the spiral can actually be turned on its head and go the other direction, if we understand the process and where it's going wrong.
All right, let's take a look at that process.
Okay, so the loop couples and cascades. So here's how the coupling works. Iron supports thyroid peroxidase, which makes T4. T4 converts to T3 via deiodinase enzymes. So T3 drives mitochondrial biogenesis and upregulates the electron transport chain complexes. Now remember, the electron transport chain is how the body basically plays a game it juggles electrons to suck energy out of them to power what it is we need powered. So it's a really cool little trick that the mitochondria use and your cells use to produce ATP. So, right, adenosine triphosphate is the energy molecule of the body, and ATP is what powers the active transport mechanisms that support cellular iron uptake, iron incorporation into the hemoproteins that run the electron transport chain. So you can see it's so embedded here that if you don't have the iron, you can't get the T4 and the T3, and then that that T3 doesn't allow the cell to uptake iron. So again, that's the death spiral. That's why it just gets worse and worse and worse as this goes on. So then let's say that the patient did have a little bit of iron in their system. Well, they might not be able to get all the iron out of their out of the food that they just ate. So then diet doesn't necessarily make up for it because it's so hard to get it back up and running. Okay. Particularly when there's inflammation around. Okay, so
that's why we've had to have some patients get the infusions.
Yeah. Now I've had patients who there's a product called Blood Builder, and that has really helped them improve quickly. That can, so supplementation can do it, but you really got to get on it. So yes, but it's going to take some time. It still takes 30 to 60 days. We're going to actually talk about the timeline. I've got a timeline in here that I made up about how long it takes for things to happen. So let's get to that. Now, so there's a second coupling mechanism that most clinicians don't know. T3 is required for the expression of transferrin receptors on cell surfaces. Now, as you recall, ferritin is the protein that holds onto iron so that we don't have free iron floating around. Transferrin is a protein that goes and gets that iron from the ferritin and transports it to cells. But cells have to have a receptor on their surface that can connect to that transferrin so that the cell itself can take the iron in. Right? So the iron's never free floating in your bloodstream. It goes from ferritin, transferrin comes along, takes some of the iron, takes it to a cell, the cell connects, it takes the iron through that transport. It doesn't just float around free. Otherwise, it'll be free game for bacteria to grab onto. And then you get bacterial infection. And particularly in your bloodstream, you don't need sepsis, right? You don't need a blood infection. Okay, so the T3 is required for the expression of transferrin receptors on the cell surface, the receptors that allow cells to pull circulating iron off the transferrin that's carrying it. Low T3 means few transferrin receptors, which means cells can't capture iron even when it's available. So thyroid insufficiency creates a form of cellular iron deficiency that has nothing to do with your ferritin level. You can actually have normal iron levels, but then the cells stop having iron because you don't have the appropriate T3. So let's say the patient had a primary thyroid problem. They actually have a form of anemia. That's part of the deal. That's why hypothyroidism causes the problems that it causes, is because of an induced anemia, even though you have plenty of ferritin and iron sitting around. Okay, now I have, so for those listening and watching the podcast, we actually have a chart here, and Brent will post this. It just kind of summarizes all that we just talked about, how iron deficiency, low ferritin leads to impaired thyroid peroxidase, less T4, less T3, how that reduced electron transport chain expression and biogenesis, lower ATP, also thyroid insufficiency. So it'll go through everything we just talked about. Okay, so what that table is telling us is that deficiency entering the loop at any single point, whether that's iron deficiency primarily, a thyroid insufficiency, such that we have low free T3, and remember that we may have plenty of T4 but not be able to put it into T3. So again, when we're asking docs, or when we're asking the patient for labs, and they're going, well, I don't think I have a thyroid problem. My doctor said my TSH is fine. The TSH, the thyroid stimulating hormone from the pituitary to the thyroid, that number will be normal. It will be, and then even the free T4 will be normal. It will be the T4 to T3 will be abnormal. So again, those are secondary tests. Those aren't the primary tests that are typically included in blood tests. So you have to ask your physician for those. And again, because we're looking for health, not simply waiting for a disease process to progress to the point where it's dangerous to the patient's life. Okay, so that any single point, and then the third point was mitochondrial dysfunction, right? Any single point tends to propagate into the other two. The loop is self-reinforcing. And because the deterioration happens slowly and touches multiple systems at once, patients and clinicians often attribute it to aging, deconditioning, or mood. Now, how many of your patients have gone to the doctor and their doctor's like, well, you are getting older? right? Unfortunately, that is too often an initial assessment of the patient or initial diagnosis. Well, you're old, without looking. And that's all that we're proposing is, hey, especially when we gather as manual therapists, we gather more information saying this patient doesn't respond like they should. Their system, particularly what we'll see as a therapist, is that we'll work on the patient and they'll say, man, whatever you did to me just knocked me out. I was laid up for like 4 days. I was in pain. I was tired. Oh man, don't do that again. You like totally overtreated me. Right. And it's like, well, yes, I overtreated you, but now that's illuminated that what we expect a normal patient to take and what we would expect a patient with a problem, one of these 3 areas to take is not the same. And we've just revealed you have a problem in one of these 3 areas. Either you have primary iron deficiency, thyroid insufficiency, or mitochondrial dysfunction. For various
we
reasons.
take the camouflage away a lot of times, and then we're like, oh, there's the real thing.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Hey,
So,
Neal, I was going to
yeah.
ask you, so what do you normally see in your practice? Which one of these 3 do your patients come in, when that camouflage is taken away, what do you uncover as far as, whether it's iron deficiency, thyroid insufficiency, or mitochondrial dysfunction?
Well, the iron deficiency is like patient after patient after patient, right? That's an easy one. Here and there, it's thyroid insufficiency. Mitochondrial dysfunction is a much more difficult one, more because of the oxidative stress, or it is truly aging, or the patients come in contact with toxins. You can't always see that one as easily. That's not as easy to measure out. It takes a much deeper look at the patient to understand that. And so that, as our mentor Bear used to say, he says, look, they're going to be your horse, right? Iron deficiency is your horse. Horses are very common. You're going to see them all the time. Thyroid insufficiency is a little more, well, you don't see that as often, but you're going to see it. Mitochondrial dysfunction is A, harder to find, but B, harder to measure for, right? That, for example, sometimes they do punch biopsies or et cetera, et cetera. So there are various ways to look at that, but there are some other things. We'll talk about it later about what other ways to find that, but it's mostly the iron deficiency that we see. And then the other 2 may be secondary to that.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks.
Yep. Okay. So what the triad looks like in tissue, right? So let's bring this back into the treatment room because this is where the triad becomes palpable. Collagen synthesis and remodeling is one of the most ATP intensive processes in the body. So pretty much I can guarantee you, every one of you who is a manual therapist out there, or every one of you out there who has any kind of tendon or ligament problem, you have some form of this process going on. So it's one of the most ATP intensive processes in the body. Prolyl hydroxylase and lysyl hydroxylase. By the end of this, you guys are all going to be experts on those words. We say them every time. The enzymes that stabilize the collagen triple helix and create the crosslinks that give tendons and ligaments their tensile strength are iron dependent. Without iron, they underperform or aren't made. And the broader process of synthesizing, transporting, and organizing collagen into functional architecture runs on mitochondrial ATP. It's an energy-heavy process. Healing is an energy-heavy process. So when the triad fails, you get a double hit to connective tissue. Insufficient iron for the hydroxylase enzymes, insufficient ATP from the mitochondria for the synthesis and remodeling work. The collagen that gets produced is architecturally inferior, less cross-linked, more prone to mechanism failure, slower to remodel under load. So I think these would be the people who have, I think Achilles tendon ruptures are going to be these people, right? They're really going to see it in that. Right.
There's
one. I would say last summer I was playing indoor soccer and I had a partial tear that's been interesting coming back from. Luckily I had a good manual therapist to help me out. So
and she makes house calls.
Yeah.
Sometimes it depends on how special you are.
Only for you, Brett. Only for you.
Yeah, I can totally relate to what you're talking about here when it comes to, tendons and ligaments and things like that. So
yeah. So when you get these people that had these injuries where it takes a long time for an Achilles tendon to rupture, that's a long-term process. And it's going to be substandard healing of that process because you go through and you're training, you're playing soccer, you're playing indoor soccer, you're tearing it down, then you build it back up, then you tear it down, then you build it back up, and you stress it. And that's good for your body. But if you don't have enough iron, At these 3 levels, you start breaking down, and the healing is inappropriate. Okay, so then, so what that feels like under your hands is tissue that is dense, ropey, and poorly differentiated. Not the boggy warmth of acute inflammation, cool, leathery, non-responsive quality of chronic metabolic insufficiency. And the key clinical tell, the tissue releases in the session, but doesn't consolidate between sessions, meaning that the patient returns the following week, essentially where they started, right? Their tissue will respond during the treatment and then just kind of falls back apart because it can't heal. It can't bring in the energy required to take it from this level up to that level, even though, we as manual therapists have provided that window of opportunity. So, yeah, and that's there's patients we have all the time. Tissue's responsive, they're also a patient you really have to work over. You work them, and then finally in the end, you're like, okay, finally, geez, I finally got this patient's body to really start to respond. But then they come back in next time, and you're like, wait a second, we're starting all over here. Why are we not making progress? And that's that metabolic substrate problem, right? And it just prevents, it just reorients the whole treatment approach. We need to say, the first thing you do is, I need to see your labs. Okay, so the biomechanical signal gets delivered, right? Whether that's exercise or whether that's treatment, the release occurs, the remodeling fails because the biochemical layer can't sustain it. And that's very different clinical conclusion than the technique is wrong, or I'm not good at this, or I don't know what I'm doing. The technique is working for what it can work on. The biology can't follow through, right? I mean, we are not going to, we are not ET here in healing tissue that otherwise won't heal. That's not us. We're not Jesus and saying, let me lay my hands on. This is the body's job, and we can't do that. So to expect us to do it, now, if we are expecting ourselves to be able to do this, well, maybe in the wrong profession. That's not what we do. We provide a window of opportunity.
I'm thinking of a couple of patients that have been taking their iron, and they're finally getting the supplementation, the help they need. And man, they come in brighter, their tissues, and it's not just the muscles that, and the skin. It's like when you press on the ribs and stuff, the organs spring back better. Like everything is healthier. And so the iron really is that currency that all these different systems use to kind of coordinate things back and forth. And it's amazing how even before that, that time frame, we say it's going to take some time, but in that process, you can already see baby steps within a couple of weeks even, and say, wow, this patient didn't look like they were dragging their knuckles on the ground behind them. And their response is so much better.
Exactly. Okay.
So, hey, Neal, just a quick question. So does that tissue remodeling heavily depend on collagen? To what extent?
Entirely.
Not just tendons and ligaments, but like your
Fascia.
muscles and other fascia.
Yeah.
It's all collagen dependent. And so
there's also another tissue called basement layer. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Without the iron, none of your tissues coalesce and maintain their identity, maintain their form, meaning they can't do their job. For example, there's one tissue layer called your basement membrane, and its job is to keep electrical charge from going through, or to keep hormones from going through an area, or so that you contain electricity, hormones, or chemicals, and bacteria or viruses or whatever. Even that will start breaking down, and then it becomes a sieve instead of a block, and then it won't. For example, think of the blood-brain barrier. If the blood-brain barrier starts breaking down, then all of a sudden you start having all sorts of problems. And we'll say, oh, it's just because you're older, but that's where the brain starts to break down, because now all of a sudden the chemicals and other things that are in the bloodstream that aren't supposed to be getting into the brain start getting into the brain and start aging the brain rapidly.
Fascinating. So and all of those layers, those barriers are collagen dependent as well.
They're all collagen dependent. I mean, and even your bloodstream is connective tissue. They're iron dependent. Every level is iron dependent. And the quality of it, it's not that you won't have it, it's that you won't have good quality fabric, if you will, or building material. Your building material will just, it'll
be porous. Like I think it'll
be porous.
You mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah. And not be able to do its job. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool.
And revealing, right? You're like, oh, okay. Well, and then I think that
this is
the other important.
I was going to say, this is getting to the root of the issue, right? It's not just kind of sticking a Band-Aid, a pharmaceutical Band-Aid on it or whatever. It's the root, and that's something that manual therapy can address, which is amazing. I love it.
Exactly. I mean, and how many of these symptoms that we've just described are there patients out there taking a medication that's for a symptom instead of getting to the underlying cause? And that's really,
Lots of them.
lots of them. And that's problematic. When people are on statins and they shouldn't be on statins, for exactly this reason, that, you won't have some of the problems you're having if you had appropriate iron, if you had appropriate thyroid function, if you had appropriate mitochondrial function, right? And that's where, like, the thyroid layer just adds that extra dimension. That T3 is required for osteoblastic activity, right? So you can't build bone without T3, right? So low T3 reduces bone turnover and impairs, so osteoblasts don't work, osteoclasts don't work. So it reduces the bone turnover, impairs matrix mineralization. In other words, you don't set down appropriate bone. So when we're looking at people with osteopenia, osteoporosis, how many of these extra tests are they doing to make sure that the patient has enough iron when they are having bone problems? Yeah, I'm just asking, and every patient's that question.
Well, and as far as kids go, because they're laying down bone and they're trying to form joints and stuff that they haven't made before. And there are situations where kids can be iron deficient. And so it's not entirely impossible that they would be, needing some help as well, especially if they were like in a baby, maybe born from a mom that might be having problems with her iron. And then it's going to be somewhat mirrored in the baby as well.
Exactly. So there's a lot of situations where this just needs to be maintained. It's a thought process, and when you're treating the patient, go, this isn't going right. Don't question your skills. Question, what your matrix is. Right.
Yeah. That's another thing that I like that you've taught us too, is we give the treatment and then you give them time to react to the treatment, right? And then explain to patients, okay, we've taken away the hammers and we've kind of unstuck things and get things flowing. And now we wait for the healing process to start, right? And then we see how it goes. And then you keep in touch with me, and then and they're like, well, when do I need to come back? I'm like, well, in certain kinds, we do certain things when we know what we've treated and what we know we're waiting to happen. But also, like, keep in touch with me. If it feels like something's not right, then let me know, or let your doctor know, or let us both know. But we watch that healing process because it should go in a certain way. And when it doesn't, then we start thinking more like the lines of nutrition, because that treatment worked on everybody else or a lot of other people, and they came out of it just fine and you didn't.
Right. And that's oftentimes why the patients are coming to see us. They've already tried all the other healthcare practitioners. Nothing's working. And you're going, okay, well, yeah. So we as manual therapists and osteopathic manual therapists have to be even more touchy about this, because we're going to get those more difficult patients. So we really need to be aware of this. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and like in patients with both iron deficiency and thyroid insufficiency, bone quality is quietly deteriorating regardless of what they're eating or how much weight bearing exercises they're doing. Piezo 1 signal from loading is getting through. The metabolic infrastructure to execute on it is not getting through. And that's exactly it. And these are the people that, I stepped in a hole and I fractured I had a bimalleolar or trimalleolar fracture. Right. So people that fracture, you're thinking, yeah, okay, people do fall and fracture things, but you've fallen before in your life and you didn't fracture. You say, oh yeah, I've fallen all the time. But, people roll their ankle and stuff, but the person that rolls their ankle and breaks their leg, you go, okay, hold on. So unfortunately, a lot of these people have already had surgery. And if they've had surgery, they may have lost more blood, which then puts them further into this. And so, for example, I think last time we talked about this, how it used to be that when somebody was going for a total hip or a total knee, about 6 to 8 weeks before, they would go and give their own blood so that then they would have time to build up their own blood stores. Now, that was blood, but I don't know that the iron was being checked, right? And so, again, that might actually kick them into worse iron deficiency, but it might also make it so it's recognizable at that point. But they would give blood so that then they got this big infusion of their own blood after the surgery so they could recover. And, of course, in that blood that's put into the bloodstream is going to be iron that, should be usable. So, and we stopped doing that. So, I don't know, I don't, sometimes you question, I think it may just be oversight in the medical system of not really realizing, like, hey, when we're going to put somebody in, have them do surgery, oftentimes the patient's waiting 2 or 3 months for the surgery. They set the surgery dates, and it's 3 months in advance. You would think that, okay, first off, we're going to do this. We're going to increase your protein. We're going to increase your iron. We're going to do this. We're going to do a deeper look at all of your blood chemicals, or your blood measurements, et cetera, et cetera. But okay,
in the patients I see, I don't see them getting that kind of like coaching and guidance before surgery. That there's not that care. There's like, oh, here's the surgery. Don't eat 24 hours beforehand. Be on water when you get in here. And that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because they're only thinking about the blood portion, and they're not thinking about the other constituents. And again, that's more information that we as manual therapists, that when you have patients, you want to say, hey, look, I don't want you to be one of those patients who's gotten a total knee replacement who can't sleep for 8 to 12 weeks. We need you to be getting your rest right away. And so here's what I would say. I suggest that we do this deeper testing of all your systems to make sure that you're not deficient in any of these areas. It's, I think it's just good advice for patients, because it's just a portion of the medical team that's being missed. So somebody has to do it. Okay. So
a lot of times we're the ones seeing them right up until then. So it falls in our laps. It's a good thing to do.
So let's go through a patient. Call her Christine, is 39. She's on her 3rd episode of left Achilles tendinopathy in 4 years. The previous 2 resolved with standard eccentric loading protocol over 10 to 12 weeks, right? She went to standard physical therapy. They gave her all that stuff, and she's better. This episode has been running 16 weeks with minimal improvement. So of course she finally showed up at my door. Ultrasound shows tendon thickening with a hypoechoic zone, meaning it's consistent with tendinosis. So on examination, the Achilles is exquisitely tender at the 2 to 4 centimeter zone, right above that calcaneus. You pinch people there, and they're, oh yeah, that's it. But here's the detail that changes the clinical picture. The fascial tissues throughout the posterior lower extremity palpates as dense and poorly hydrated, bilaterally, not just on the involved side. So you squeeze the other side and you're saying, you kind of feel a little bit like ropey clay or something. And it produces bilateral fascial changes. So you go through their labs, 23 nanograms per milliliters, transfer and saturation 15%, free T3 at the low end of the reference range. TSH is normal, of course. C-reactive protein mildly elevated, not horrible. So this is a subclinical triad failure, right? The ferritin for a female, 23 is in the norm. It's not the very low end, but it's near to the low end. But most people are going to go, well, you're still in the green, you're good, right? Because it's color coded. They'll say, oh, it's green, maybe yellow. But this is triad failure, subclinical triad failure. Iron deficiency, degrading collagen hydroxylation in a repeatedly loaded tendon, right? I mean, she's a runner. She does she does a little bit of CrossFit. She likes to do her she goes to various classes, HIIT classes, this, that, the other. So she has low free T3, reducing the anabolic signaling that drives tenocyte repair, mild inflammation, elevating reverse T3, right? And further blunting T3 availability at the tissue level, right? So she's just, she's missing it on many little areas. No one area is big, but they all add up to, and again, this is no one tree is horrible. But when you pull back from looking at trees and look at the forest, you realize, wait a second, this patient's having a problem. Okay, so the treatment plan, iron repletion and selenium, right? We checked that she had slightly low selenium. Eccentric protocol, paused for 4 weeks while the biochemistry improves. So I told her no more of the physical therapy, stop there. Manual therapy to both lower extremities, right? Addressing the bilateral fascial picture. I mean, really, in the end, I'm giving her whole body exercises and not just focusing on the symptomatic tendon. We have to get all the tendons to respond. Otherwise, she'll be back in a couple of months with something else, So eccentric loading reintroduced at week 5, right? So by week 5 of her, repletion of ferritin repletion or iron repletion, she can start eccentrically loading. It won't be too much for her system because she does need signals to tell the tissue, hey, reheal again. Let's try that again. Let's see if you can get it right this time. And by 12 weeks of metabolic treatment, ferritin is at 58. Awesome. Tenderness is reduced by 70%. Pretty great. The eccentric protocol is being tolerated without flare. So she's now back at the normal physical therapist and doing all her stuff. And by 20 weeks, ferritin 79, free T3, totally normalized. She's running without tendon symptoms for the first time in 4 years. The ultrasound, she went back and had the ultrasound, shows hypoechoic zone resolved.
And this patient, this is exactly the kind of stuff that you're teaching us all the time. If you've studied with you at all, if it's happening on both sides of the body, it's a systemic problem. We do not use the right and left side of the body the same at all. Once you get the skin off, it's not the same, right? And so, you can have if it's just a one tendon, okay, it's probably you're running wrong or there's something, with your biomechanics. But when it's everywhere, then you're like, nah, that's nutritional or that's, some kind of toxin or something in your environment that's on that chemical level that's not right. that it's not just, you have bad form with this or whatever. That's one of the things that I appreciate, that I'm not chasing the same thing and be like, oh, this is going to be a bread and butter patient for weeks, because, you're treating all these symptoms, and really what you have is a nutritional problem.
Yes, exactly.
And then as a therapist, you're going to find everything you work on that patient is going to feel better. Not just the Achilles tendon, not any of that stuff. It's going to be the whole thing. All the connective tissue is going to feel better. They're going to respond better, and they're going to feel better. They'll look different coming in.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think I'm contemplating making it a requirement to be a patient in my clinic that you bring your labs with you, just so that
Are you?
we can start off this way. Yeah, just because um, it's so detrimental. As you said, it's hard to get people better, and then they lose confidence, or they lose focus on you getting better. Just going, well, maybe this isn't the thing. I want to know that stuff up front. I think more is what I think what I'm looking for. And again, just because I tend to see, and you tend to see, all the worst cases. We don't get just every Joe off the street. We get, people are walking in after they've tried everything else, and this is often the thing. So I think maybe that's what I'll do, is start just asking for this up front.
Well, that's a good idea, because I've been thinking, when I build my clinic, I'm going to have a plasma donation center or a whole blood donation center in there, and I'm going to have so where you can get our iron checked and get that figured out right now. So, I have big plans, but you're like, hey, I need to
Exactly.
know this stuff. So it needs to be close, or at least readily accessible, for sure.
Exactly.
But requiring it is pretty awesome.
Yeah, just gotta say, hey, bring your labs. Anyway, okay, so let's go through what we as manual therapists can do. So where does manual care fit? It fits where it almost always fits, not as a replacement for the medical work, but as a way to change the biological environment in which the triad is trying to recover. The first contribution is autonomic. Chronic sympathetic dominance and chronic inflammation feed each other, and both suppress the triad. Thoracolumbar treatment, suboccipital treatment, cranial treatment, diaphragmatic work, anything that improves vagal tone, lowers interleukin 6. Now, as manual therapists, as osteopathic manual therapists, we know that you don't just raise vagal tone, you also have to help sympathetic tone modulate appropriately. Because if there's too high of a sympathetic tone, particularly at any level or systemically, that will cause the vagus to time up with it and enhance the inflammatory, as opposed to decrease the inflammatory state. So, and lowering interleukin 6 means we lower hepcidin. Remember, hepcidin is that partial protein produced in the liver to lock iron into the ferritin. Lower hepcidin means the iron.
It's the party crasher.
The party crasher.
We call it the
exactly.
party crasher. Yeah, it doesn't let, or like the bank, it won't let, it won't let the iron out of the bank.
Exactly. Stops the party in its tracks.
Yeah.
So lower hepcidin means that iron that's been locked in a storage starts to become available. We're not treating iron directly. We're reducing the inflammation, or the inflammatory field that's holding it hostage. Okay, second is sequencing the structural work to the biochemical recovery. In the early phase, the first 4 to 6 weeks before ferritin and free T3 begin normalizing, load the tissue gently, right? So we do want the patient to exercise, but only gently. And so again, first 4 to 6 weeks, we have to tell them, look, we need time for this, for your iron stores to begin to build up, without over challenging the system. Because if we over challenge the system, we'll just cause inflammation, and if we cause the inflammation, the patient may not be able to absorb the iron in the first place. So it's a very touchy, like, you have to go along and smoothly let each step take place, because if they just jump right back into their normal levels, they'll cause inflammation of either their intestinal tract or inflammation of their joints that will just completely overwhelm the system, and we won't get anywhere, right? So let's see. The second is sequencing the structural work to the biochemical recovery. In the early phase, the first 4 to 6 weeks, talked about that. Heavy eccentric loading into a collagen substrate that can't remodel will worsen the tendinopathy, not improve it. The skill decision is recognizing when the ceiling is metabolic, not mechanical, and stepping back from the load accordingly. So for our friend Josh, you don't always do squats.
He'll love that.
You might have to start with just, easy.
He might
Okay.
He might make a comment underneath.
Right, exactly. You might get a response from that one.
Yeah.
So as the triad restores, the tissue's capacity to adapt to load restores with it. So, and our the third contribution here is to communicate the timeline honestly with the patient. Full triad restoration takes 3 to 6 months. Energy and sleep typically improve first. So weeks 4 to 6. So we want to hear that from the patient that they've, and I think you said this, Autumn, you said, well, even after a couple of weeks, the patient comes in, they're a little cheerier, they're a little brighter, their system's already starting to be responsive. It's pretty cool. But we have to let them know, look, we're looking for energy and sleep to improve first. You've got to get that deep restorative sleep. You can't have fractionated sleep. So if there's a sleep problem, let's take care of that as well. That's the first 4 to 6 weeks. Then structural improvements in tissue quality and treatment carryover will follow. Weeks 12 to 16, right? And some people will be faster on this, some people will be slower on this. The patient who's been stuck for years should know that recovery is measured in months, not sessions. So that expectation at the outset and the therapeutic relationship becomes a lot more productive. So for manual therapists to really understand, and for the patients to understand, this didn't happen overnight. It's not going to improve overnight, but we need to give it the right things from the beginning.
Yeah. And give it that time in between sessions. Like we're very different in that I don't have anyone that comes in multiple times a week unless they happen to be on vacation or, it's a weird thing, but otherwise we don't have like multiple weeks where we're doing, 2 or 3 times a week, any of that kind of stuff, because you keep them sore. You're not letting that tissue adapt fully to what you've done. And when we use this mechanotransduction to make chemical and bioelectrical changes, you have to let the tissue like respond to that and deal with it. And they're going to detox. You don't want to turn them into a landfill. And so you have to watch. And then that's where you kind of have that like watch and wait, but we're still keeping in touch and seeing what we do. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, no, and thank you for bringing that up, because that's exactly what doctors do. They say, oh, I want you in there 3 times a week, or I want you in there 2 days a week. And it's because the doctor wants changes now. Yeah, and that's just it. That's one of the problems with traditional rehab is that they're being overloaded right off the bat. I mean, the patient's already come to the doctor telling them they're overloaded. The doctor really should have said, well, okay, before we overload you more, let's figure out why you're not able to respond to this insult. But
I always tell my
we're all
patients,
part of the team.
yeah, I always tell my patients, I'm like, okay, we've just given you the treatment now. And it's like your body, we've set all these things in motion. All these dominoes are falling and things are happening. It's like, I always bring it back to moms, right? But it's like you're at the stove and you're making dinner and your kid's like, I'm hungry. And you're like, you know what? I am making dinner. I'm not fixing to think about it. I'm not going to get around to it. I'm doing it. You just have to wait. And when it's done, it'll be done. And some of these are chemical processes that have fixed rates and they just take a little bit of time. And so, yeah, sometimes it's uncomfortable and stuff. That doesn't mean the treatment failed or it's not working or you got to come back in sooner. But that's where you're like, maybe text me or talk to the front desk person or whatever. And we'll get that information back and forth, the feedback. But yeah.
Well, and then don't be going back to your other therapist and overloading yourself, because they're going to overload you. They have no clue. Right. For the most part.
Or go to someone else in
clue.
between. Don't run from me to the chiropractor to the, to everybody else and have everybody, try and muscle you around their own way.
Right. Because they're not aware of, they may not be aware of all the things going on. And once we've uncovered this, since we've uncovered it, let us treat it. Right. Let us take it through the process. Okay. So there you go. There's the triad: iron, thyroid, mitochondria, all coupled into a feedback loop that governs cellular energy production, structural maintenance, and neurological regulation simultaneously. A deficiency entering at any node propagates through all 3. Single node treatment produces partial recovery. Full recovery requires restoring the full loop, right? So, and there's the surprising thing. When we're doing manual therapy, we're trying to get your mitochondria to grow. That's part of what happens with our treatment. The patients we're describing are not difficult patients. They're patients whose biochemical execution layer has never been assessed as a system. Start assessing it that way. And the clinical picture that looked like chronic, treatment resistant, nothing is working, starts to resolve into something specific, predictable, and correctable, right? So if you take a deeper look at a lot of these issues and you're just asking for better information, right? It's always important to ask for better information, better history, better, what are the medications you're taking? More information is always going to help you. So I'm Neal with Brent Mayberry and Autumn Mayberry. Thanks for being here, guys. And until next time,
Neal.
Pay attention to the signals. All right. See you guys.
Thanks, Neal. Hey, before we sign off here, I just wanted to ask our listeners if any of this was interesting. If you had any aha moments, we'd love to hear about them. You can leave a comment in the appropriate spot wherever you're listening, and or you can send us a question at questions@osteosignal.com. We'd love to hear what you think of what Neal presented today. Leave us a review and or 5 stars on iTunes. If that's something you want to do, that would go a long way to showing us that, or telling us that what we're doing is helping you out. So we appreciate you listening, and hope that you'll give us some feedback and let us know how we're doing. So,
and if you're a
thank you for
practitioner that has patients that don't respond the way you want them to, come to class with us. It'll help.
Yeah, even if you have any success stories in your clinics, we'd love to hear about that too. So let us know. You can email those stories or comment below, and tell us how you're applying these principles in your practice. We'd love to hear about that. All right, thanks again, Neal.
Thank you, Neal.
All right, thank you guys. Yeah,
okay, we'll see you next time.
Good time. All right, see you guys next time.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of OsteoSignal. For more information, visit pursuitpt.com or pursuitperformancetraining.com. Want to show your support for the podcast? Hit that subscribe or follow button, like this episode, and leave us a comment or review. Remember, this podcast is for informational purposes only. Please consult your healthcare provider for any medical advice. Copyright 2026, Neal D. O'Neill, PT.